revolutionary, an organizer, straight up communist. Um,
Yeah.
and we're really excited to talk about that and what does that mean this next hour. But first, so before we get into this, how did you get into revolutionary politics? What was your road and what was your journey into that like?
That's a really good one. So, like my parents are campesinos, right? My mom is currently a farm worker, and my dad's a tractor trailer truck driver for the farms. But they always kind of raised us with all of this revolutionary music, right? Like as a little kid, I didn't even know that it was like revolutionary until much, much later. So, like I would say that some of my first questions, or sorry, some of my first introductions to revolutionary ideas definitely came from my parents, and I had no idea that it was revolutionary, right? So like Victor Jara, they like had us with his music all the time, or like Piero, right? These are artists, Latinoamericano artists who were and are very revolutionary, especially like Victor Jara, who was assassinated in the Pinochet era, right? So like I didn't know, and it wasn't until like as an adult I realized that that's what they were listening and having us listen to. And so, I finally started getting a lot more radicalized when I started doing super anti-imperialist work when I was a youngster living in Florida, and I joined an organization called Students for a Democratic Society. And that's the rest is history. I mean, that's when I finally started reading. Angela Davis was one of my first people who like completely like I just identified with her so much at the time because I mean I was like I'm obviously a Chicana and I was like okay so like I should be reading who? Like I should be reading Marx? Like why should I be reading Marx, right? Like he's like this like old like white European guy who like I don't get it, right? Like from the 1800s, ¿qué es eso? So I was like, okay, let me read some Angela Davis and yeah, that's like the first introduction was her exact like to her autobiography, right? She was asking herself that same exact question. Like why should I read these like white guys who are like long dead and they know nothing about me when I'm like a black woman like living in like straight up oppression, right? And so she asked herself that question, and then she was like, "Well, because they've done it before, they've organized a successful revolution before." And I was like, "Oh my god!" And yeah, then I started picking up the books, and I started thinking, Marx was right, Lenin was right, Engels was right, and Mao is definitely right, And so are a bunch of people like Fidel Castro, and just picking up all the books and making sure I understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you pick up the politics. You're involved in what most people call anti-war, but you're referring to as anti-imperialist. So what would you say is the difference between being anti-war and being
Mm-hmm.
anti-imperialist?
Yeah. So, anti-war, I think that like for me as like a chiquita, like a chicanita growing up in like high school as a 16-year-old, I was like an anti-war not activist. I wasn't even an activist. I was just like a sympathizer, right? I'm like, oh no, war is bad, like peace and love. And I mean, there's a lot of people who are there and it's okay, but you're right. There is a moment where you make the crossover and it's a very conscious thing, right? So you go from being a sympathizer or somebody who believes in nonviolence, right? And then you start realizing like, wow, like it's much deeper than that. Like you could straight up be in your house like we are right now and people are dying quite literally from COVID-19 and meanwhile the US is ready to bomb, like who did they recently bomb? I think they bombed Iran again, right? And it's like
Oh yeah.
why like you're at your house, you're doing your thing, and the US is busy bombing Iran instead of making sure that people have free medical care. So it's like, what could I do to make sure that that doesn't happen? That's when I started thinking about that, right? And so it's like that's when you become an anti-imperialist person. Like you start realizing that the problem isn't just like, the soldier. It's actually what is creating that move to make sure that the empire can expand itself, its control across borders, across wherever it needs to make sure that it becomes free, right? And so to make sure that you can stop that is like pivotal. And and it's like, it's a conscious thing, but it's also like really hard to do. And you have to keep doing it because the enemy is very powerful and it's very clever at making sure that it can continue to expand.
So when you first started getting involved, when you made that kind of switch from
Mm-hmm.
being anti-war to anti-imperialist, when you went from, not necessarily for being opposed to people being oppressed to more like, like, hey, stop killer cops, and it turns into like the police are there to protect property. Like, so how did that change your activism or your involvement in the movement, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. So I started off doing like some of the first actions that I did in regards to like anti-imperialism were around 2012 in September. There were consecutive raids around the country, and they were very, very like well thought out, very well orchestrated. And it was an investigation of 23 anti-war activists, right? And some of them were members of Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which I'm a member of. At the time, I was not, though. I just found out about it. I read about it on Fight Back News, and I was like, wow, like, why would the US be like investing so much money in making sure that it surveils all of these 23 anti-war activists? You know, at the time I considered myself anti-war. And so I started like doing a lot more research, and I realized that it's because, you know, they are the enemy. Anti-war activists are totally the enemy to the US because they want to make sure that they can do whatever they want to do undeterred, right? And so that was like some of the first actions that I started doing was solidarity events with those 23 activists and making sure that I could help host actual like talks by the people who got raided by the FBI. And I in Florida, I was in Florida at the time. We hosted one of the people to come over. Her name was Jess Sundin, and it was both her and her wife who were raided. And you know, like if you know anything about the cases, you know that they just completely dumped everything out of their houses, right? Like all these boxes. And so that's when I started realizing, oh my God, like this is much bigger than I actually realized, right? And so like initially I joined like the anti-war movement because my brother actually got drafted into the military right after September 11th, coincidentally. He's also Chicano, right? But he had a different status. He wasn't a US citizen. So that's why he joined, right? He knew that he, as a US citizen or a non-US citizen at the time, back in 2001, right? You couldn't really get like becas or scholarships to go to school. So he knew that. And so that's why he joined. And so that's when I first attended, right? I was like, oh, well, I'm opposed to like, you know, my brother being a soldier and like soldiers. And then it went on to progress into I'm helping defend anti-war activists to then later realizing that, you know, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and capitalism is like basically what rules us in the United States, right? Like as a Chicana, as somebody who's African American, capitalism rules you no matter what. Like you could just be in your house again, right? Like we're going to create our little bubble as an example, and you could just be doing your own thing without realizing that you could turn on your TV, you could go to your phone, and every single second it's capitalism going down your throat to make sure that, you know, it continues to profit off of your labor.
Yeah. So oftentimes people have a description of capitalism,
Yeah.
and what they're really describing is workplace abuse or a kind of or they're describing like people being really greedy, or they're talking about having a particularly pernicious job, but I don't think they really understand the totality of what capitalism is. I mean, can you explain when you say capitalism, what is it you're referring to?
Well, it's kind of like how the bourgeoisie or the 1%, the rich, how they are able to basically make their profit, right? How do they exist? How do we make them exist? They don't just fall from the sky. Uh, Even though at this point it's kind of like they do fall from the sky because we're so like separated, right? Like as a working class person, you're so separated. Like the amount of money and the way that they are structured in society is so far removed from us that we can't really think like, oh, like they existed before, you know, like before they were probably not rich in generations ago. But yeah, so it's the way that the bourgeoisie can make their profit, essentially. Marx wrote this amazing book, right? That's called Das Kapital, and then there's like a really smaller version of it that's condensed into like, you know, probably like that. It was written by this really cool guy named Leon Tiev, and in it you can actually see, you know, like it's Marx's theory of what is capitalism, and there are actual formulas of how the bourgeois or the rich have accumulated their wealth and how they are able to reserve different parts of their money into making sure that they continue to thrive. But what they're really doing is exploiting us as the working class, as the laborer, to make sure that they can, because what we do, even though we might not realize it, is that everything is structured into a wage, right? Like into how we as a worker are paid, right? For what we do, for the amount of labor that we sell. And so you go to work, you punch in, and they pay you your hour or whatever you did. And really, what the capitalist is doing is buying you off so that they can use you to become richer. And so, that's essentially what capitalism is. It's that whole thing where they steal from you, where the bourgeois is stealing from you as the worker. And it's not just like some a metaphysical thing; it's an actual theft.
So what would happen if the capitalists were to pay you the actual value of what you produce?
Oh wow. So then it would look a lot different, right? And I wouldn't even be able to tell you like what would equal the actual amount of like, the amount of labor that we put into what we do every day. It's really hard because, our society, or I should say US society, is structured in such a way where it doesn't make any damn sense, right? When you look at socialist countries, everything is structured to make sure that the people can thrive, right? So like the way that it is in Cuba, or the way that the Soviet Union started to build their neighborhoods and their way of working and living, it was very communal, right? So you had like a circle, and you made sure that your place of entertainment was nearby where you lived, your house was really close to where you worked, and it just made sense that way. And how do you even come up with that idea for the US? Like, it's not even possible. We live in Los Angeles, where we are so far away from where we might even work. We might not even work. So like, what would that even look like? First of all, they got to pay you to make sure that you can eat, that if you get sick, you are covered for your health insurance, that your children are cared for, that their education is taken care of, that your transportation is taken care of. What about your food? It's just like the list goes on. It's such a hefty bill that they would have to pay that it's just, I can't even fathom it.
Yeah. So here's a couple quick ones. Why is it that China is able to build a hospital in 10 days, and in the United States of America, the president is suggesting we drink bleach?
Right. So that's I love your question, and I love your style of asking the question, Matt. That's because, China is socialist. I think it gets a lot of bad flack from people, especially right now because of the coronavirus. People are faulting China for them coming down with COVID-19, or their workplaces not being safe, or them not being able to pay for rent, right? Which in reality, it's the US that is preventing you from being able to acquire these things, but to pay for these things, to make sure that you don't get sick. This is a capitalist society. It's a bourgeois society where the rich are making sure that they are the ones in control, and you're just a worker for them. But China is not built that way. Instead of channeling their energy into whatever is happening on a regular day outside of coronavirus, they restructured themselves and made sure to concentrate all production to ensure that a hospital could be built. And what does that look like, right? It's not just this idea. It actually looked like what you said, Matt. It was built in 10 days. It was a state of the art, not just like some like hut, with like a napkin and like hand sanitizer. No, it was like a legitimate hospital, state of the art, that was completely funded by the people's government. It's called the People's Republic of China. And, it was there. It was ready to go. But then, I don't know if everybody knows, but there are some bad folks who do live in China. There's like a different movement that's trying to say that, it's super oppressive. We're all dying. The Taiwanese folks who actually tried to destroy it, So, but yeah, that it looks very, very different in the US.
Okay, so why is it that Cuba can in the middle of a health pandemic send doctors around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and the United States of America, there's a president suggesting we drink bleach?
Right, right. It's also for the same thing, Matt. It's the same thing. It's because you are naming countries that are socialist, or nations that are socialist. Cuba, Vietnam, there's a lot of different places. In North Korea, a lot of people have the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. There's been a lot of like, not ignorant. There's a literal like ignoring of the facts that that North Korea is right there, so close to China, and yet like, they're also doing okay. It's for the same reasons. You have a society that takes care of its people and always does whenever there's a catastrophe like a hurricane, for example, in Cuba. They've done that time and time again. Every year, I would say, like clockwork, when there's a hurricane in the Caribbean, there's always a perfect example that Cuba gives the world where they are able to recover, even though it's one of the poorest countries in the world, because of the sanctions that the U.S. helps put on them and a bunch of other really powerful nations around the country. And yet they are still able to help make sure that people recover safely in their own country. And then they send out doctors all the time to like Haiti, and other places of the world.
Why is it that the United States of America is sending warships or threatening to send warships to Venezuela, strengthening sanctions against Iran, strengthening sanctions against Nicaragua, while simultaneously there are in the United States of America veterinarians sending donating ventilators. There are tattoo artists donating gloves, and there are priests who are raiding their basement or raiding tombs to find medical masks.
Right. So, it's the same thing. You have the U.S. who, no matter what, has absolutely no shame, right? They function on a different scale from what we normally think is acceptable. They have no shame, they have no qualms about destruction, right? And to make sure that all they do is extract profit. That's how they function. And so, of course, they're going to use this perfect opportunity when people are paying attention to washing their hands, which they should, or like covering up their faces, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, the only news that matters right now is coronavirus news, right? But at the same time, they're doing exactly what you said, Matt. They are making sure to try to have soldiers and a bunch of other people, 300 people, try to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which is ridiculous, right? 300 people compared to like the amount that it would take to destroy a place like Venezuela is just, obviously they failed. Some of my comrades have actually coined it the piglet bay, or what is it, the bay of piglets, which I thought was which I thought was really funny, because it's, it was just a few 300 who thought that they could overthrow Venezuela, and amongst them were actual U.S. soldiers, right? So of course they're gonna try to again, they have no problem doing it because they function on a different scale. They're perfectly okay. They go home every night, and they are so separated from the reality of coronavirus that it will never touch them. It will, however, kill all of us who are working at a drive-through restaurant and being exposed to tons of people who come through drive-through without covering their faces, So, yeah.
Yeah. So why is it that Juan Guaido received a standing ovation during the State of the Union here in America, but was then thrown out of the Venezuela parliament the following week?
Yeah. So it was what was interesting about that too, Matt, is that, it was Nancy Pelosi and Trump who were standing up and clapping, right? They were like two of the first people to rise up and clap for him, which, that's kind of interesting because like I like this whole like, two-party system that the US likes to push on people, that it's like two separate and distinct parties that are not the same at all. The Republicans and the Democrats, they are so different. Like you have the Democrats who are the bastion of everything that is correct, and then you have the Republicans who are horrible, and you would never, so it's all a lie. There is literally one type of party, and it's the parties of the 1%. None of them, no matter who you vote for, who's a Democrat or Republican, are going to bring you liberation in terms of being the working class. I mean, they're not exactly the same, but they are pretty much the same if you think of it in terms of class, right? So, that's why they were standing up and giving him a big old clap. And then you're right, when Guaido got to Venezuela, it started even at the airport. He wasn't even out of the airport, and people were already, yelling at him and calling him an embarrassment, which he is, my husband actually was in Venezuela this year, right before the pandemic. Actually, the shit hit the fan, if I can say that on here. Sorry about that. And so, my husband was at the same place that Guaido was from. I can't remember the name of the city. What is it called again? I think he's around. La Guaira. he was there, and you know, he was talking to the people at the beach, and they were saying, yeah, he's from here, and we don't really care for him, we don't claim him. So you know, the people overwhelmingly of Venezuela, you know, are ashamed of him, and they will beat him up in the street because he deserves it.
Why didn't Bernie Sanders lead a long march into the Rockies?
Oh wow. I don't remember that reference. What's that one to? Was that supposed to
No,
happen?
I'm saying, he lost. I mean, he was clearly cheated or whatever. Or he's been
Oh,
cheated.
I see.
So why not lead a people's struggle, a revolution into the Rockies or the Appalachia, or some kind of
I
mountain.
get you. I
Yeah,
understand now. Thank you, Matt.
yeah.
So, again, right, let's talk about like what the government structure really is like. You know, it's I would say that a lot of good people have tried throughout the years to you know, become a part of the current government structure, or you know, they think that once they get into power, you know, voted into the democrat through the process of democracy, right? That suddenly they'll cause like a huge ripple of change, and it'll lead to a revolution, you know. That isn't quite how things change in America, in the US, I should say. You do have to overthrow it. You do have to overthrow the system and tip it on its head, right? If we think of it in terms of a triangle, at the very base is the biggest base, and that's the working class. And at the very tippy top is the 1%, the bourgeoisie, the rich. And that's people like Trump who were multi-billionaires. And I know that that's a big number that we throw around, but it's enormous. And you know, somewhere underneath them are the people who make sure that they stay in power, and that includes the government. And, you know, Bernie Sanders was going to be a part of that if he had won presidency. And, you know, for many reasons, you know, I think that people like us understand that Bernie Sanders was not like a legitimate communist, I guess you could say. I would say he wasn't. But, you know, he was a democratic socialist. And even for some reason, that was super scary to the one percenters, to the rich. And they, I guess the Democrats didn't want to make, you know, wanted to make sure that he didn't win. So he didn't win again for the second time for whatever reason. I mean, they really think that Hillary Clinton and Biden really have this in at the end of the day, right? I don't know what they're thinking, but I would say that you know, if Bernie had reached presidency, I don't know what that would actually have looked like. I think it would actually be pretty similar to Obama, you know, where a lot of people really were excited about Obama. And you know, he was the first black president, so that is a difference, right? It's like a combo breaker if you're a video gamer, right? But I would say that, you know, like he was the deporter in chief. He deported over 2 million people.
Yeah.
Not him personally, but under his presidency, he could have stopped it, or he could have, I don't know, done a lot of other things. And that just goes to show you that that's the kind of government structure that rules the U.S. Right? It's meant to keep people in power who are powerful, and it's not going to do anything to ensure that they're not in power.
Why did Jeff Bezos get a GoFundMe to pay his workers?
Oh, yeah, that was weird, right? I always wonder how, like, can I get some of that money? Like, I'm always like, where do I sign up to get just the money and not do it? Yeah, I thought that was weird. We were, a lot of my comrades and I were actually joking about how do we go and get the Jeff Bezos money. Um, yeah, it's odd. I mean, when was it? It was like I think in 2011 or something. That was like the first time that actual corporations could be thought of as an entity, right? Where they could have like voting power and stuff. I think it's just an extension of that.
Yeah. Why did Elon Musk launch a car into space?
Uh because he's powerful and he has a lot of money and you know, time on his hands.
Yeah. Yes, good answer. All right, man. Enough of that. All right, so here's what I'm interested in seeing what you think about this. Like, a lot of people talk about Bernie Sanders as having kind of advanced a lot of these things because they put terminology on the table like socialism, revolution. But I think that he's watered these things down. I mean, the concept of socialism. I mean, my understanding of socialism is a planned economy. It's a planned economy. It's
Mm-hmm.
workers' control. It's the dictatorship of the proletariat. It's it's not capitalism. It's
Right.
being produced for their material need and not for sales and consumption and the anarchy of
Hmm.
the
Fetish
market.
commodities.
Yeah, and yeah, not for the fetish commodities, but so that's socialism. So to say something to describe it as getting war with healthcare is not socialism.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that's one thing, and then revolution. I mean, what he's talking about is an election's not a revolution, and a national healthcare system is not socialism. I mean, like
Hmm.
those things do not mean those things. So
Hmm.
I don't know. In some ways, I mean, it's good that there's people that are full of energy and don't want to die, and they got galvanized by that.
Yeah.
But the kind of mangling of these terminology, I think, is kind of a bad thing. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, it kind of like, I think it can confuse people, right? They it was kind of like what's his name? Ron Paul.
Yeah,
He
Ron
had
Paul.
that whole yeah, he had that whole revolution thing down too, right? He was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
it's a revolution." And I think he was a libertarian, right?
he was.
Um yeah, so it's like, like it's quite the word. Even the capitalists have used, you're right, revolution to mean all sorts of things. Like, when they think of a new innovative idea, they think it's a revolution.
A
Which is like,
revolution
oh,
in razors.
yeah, there you go. Or like a driverless car. What a revolution, right? Yeah, you're right, Matt. I would say that in some ways, like, there were some good things that came out of, like, maybe Bernie Sanders giving it a go. I think a lot of younger people started realizing, like, oh, like, maybe there is like a different thing. I would think maybe. And I would say that some of them were probably looking out for like different alternatives. Um, I mean, some of them did join us, like Centro CSO. I would have to say that our mass group, our community service organization group in Boyle Heights, a lot of our younger people who joined us were super excited initially about Bernie Sanders when they first joined, and for different reasons. I'm not sure what exactly got them, but I was happy that it got them to actually attend their first protest. I'll give them that. So we have to take it from there. Like, as revolutionary people, we do have to be centered within the masses, right, within the people who are every day affected by what's going on in this country. And so, if we're not there, you got them thinking that Bernie Sanders is the bastion of hope, and that can be all sorts of a problem. I don't want a lot of Hillary Clintons walking around.
So we have a question from the audience. It says, "Hey Soul, did you see the latest video by the LAPD in Boyle Heights where they beat up a homie from the neighborhood? Is there
Yeah.
a protest planned soon? I am down to help." Comes from Fernando.
Yes, yes. And I know Fernando. So hi, shout out to Fernando. So yeah, we definitely saw that. Speaking of Centro CSO, we got tagged so many times I actually lost count. I'm one of the administrators on the social media accounts for Centro CSO. There's quite a bit of us on there, so it's not just me. But we were all talking about how we were continuously getting tagged. We still are, actually. People are still sending us messages. They're like, "Did you see it?" And we're like, "Yeah." Thank you so much, right? So what Fernando's talking about is a police officer in Boyle Heights, LAPD Hollenbeck Station, which is notorious for killing Chicanitos and Chicanos in general all the time. And I live like not even a block away from them, so we get to see it firsthand how they leave their headquarters all the time. And yeah, so he beat up somebody who supposedly was trespassing and was not resisting, and he beat him up pretty bad. And it's so obvious that he just was exercising his power over, an innocent person. And meanwhile, his partner was just watching the whole thing and then radioed for backup. So Centro CSO, because we do a lot of work in Boyle Heights and East LA around police brutality and police terror, and we demand that they jail these killer cops, or that we have community control over the police. We've set up a petition. It just went live actually a few hours ago. And you can sign the petition, and in the petition, we demand that Chief of LAPD, sorry, I was going to say Charlie because, in my mind, he's still around. Michael Moore fire this officer or cop, this abusive cop. His name is Frank Hernandez. So we know his name, and actually he killed someone in 2010, an undocumented day laborer who was Guatemalteco. And his last name was Jimenez, but I'm Manuel Jimenez.
Oh yeah,
He killed. Yeah, do you remember that? I actually wasn't living in LA in 2010. I was living in Florida, but I did go back and see the articles, and some of our members in Centro CSO helped organize protests against that killing. But it's the same guy. It's the same guy. They could have fired him and gotten rid of him then, or put him in jail, but instead he is terrorized Chicano on April 27th in Boyle Heights. So to answer Fernando's question, we have a petition set up right now because of COVID-19. We're trying to keep people safe. So that's the first step. If we do think of a plan like where we're going to protest, we will definitely let people know right away. And Fernando, you'll be one of the first ones.
Yeah, yeah. Why are the police so violent in a capitalist system?
They got to make sure that, you know, the rich people have it nice and cushy, and that they can make sure to wipe us out, you know, clean house, clean the streets. And they think that, you know, people who look like us walking around in our own streets is a threat to them. They don't want us organized. And, you know, that's why they delete pages like La Raza Unida parties pages off of Facebook, right? It's the same thing, except for on the streets, the cops will kill you. They will kill you, or they'll beat you up, and they think nobody's watching.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about La Raza Unida page? I mean, it's so bizarre. Like, I'm like this interviewer that doesn't exist. but
Yeah.
can you talk about La Raza Unida page and what happened?
Yeah. So a few days ago? I think it was like literally hace 2 días, no? Like on the 4th. If it was the 5th, I'd be so ironic if it was yesterday, right? Pero Facebook just took down their page without giving them a warning, because usually they give you a warning, right, when they're going to take down your page, like, oh, you should verify like your name, or you have an error in your links or whatever. Pero sin aviso, they just like straight up deleted the page. The La Raza Unida party is a party that existed by a bunch of Chicanos in the 60s. For those of you who might not know, and you know, it was really good folks, and there was a lot of people who actually won political office. And then some of their folks who got in, they were also heavily repressed by the rich racists, right? But you know, flash forward to today, it's still around, and they have a page, and the page had been around for 10 years, over 140,000 followers, right? And likes, and they just, without any warning, deleted it. And I think Ernesto was saying that also, coincidentally, the very next day, 20, I think, accounts, right, got flagged for supposedly affecting the way that the government works, or something like that, right? Which I thought was really, really interesting, that, you know, they didn't say that to La Raza Unida people, but they did publicly say this later.
Yeah. So it seems to be a bit of a raid.
Yeah.
So you know, talking about the streets and talking about erasing things, it seems like Boyle Heights is facing a lot of gentrification. It's interesting to me though. Like I've been talking to some people about this. This kind of came up time and time again. That part of the gentrification process is that they want to whitewash the murals first. Why do you think they? Why do you think there's a need for them to whitewash the murals as they push people out?
I know, it's terrible. I know that the one at the intersection of Soto and Chavez, right, that's been around since I'm forgetting the year. I don't think it's the 40s, but it's pretty old. That one already got permission to be whitewashed, right? Oh, excuse me. And you know, it's terrible, but I think it's a whole plan, right? Like when you want to come in and you know, extend your tentacles as a because let's think of it in terms of like class, right? Because you know, that's exactly what gentrification means. It means one class oppressing another. And you know, it can look totally different for people. I think some of the things that the most like obvious thing that people think of when they think of gentrification is somebody who's like white coming in, right? There are like poor white working class people though, right? Or like African American or Asian, you know, or other nationalities that are probably not Chicano. But you know, gentrification is all about class. And the people who tend to be really rich in California are white. Let's be real. You know, like it's not like we're living in like the South where a lot of like really, really poor white people live, right? Over here, they tend to be rich. They tend to be attached to Hollywood, and they tend to be attached to investors who are part of Hollywood. Like that's just how it goes here. You know, and so when they're coming in to Boyle Heights, they really are bringing their own folks, right? Their own rich investors, and it looks very different than Raza, right? the people who are normally from here. So of course, to match them, they're thinking, let's whitewash these and make them look like us.
Yeah, no, it's very unfortunate. So why is it that a market system
Mm.
can never provide the goods and necessities during a health pandemic?
Ooh, like the US is, right?
Yeah.
I would say that they're totally able to. They're more than equipped to be able to do it. But you know, when in this kind of society, the land where the rich people rule us, um, you know, all they think about is in terms of their pockets, in terms of how they can keep their businesses alive and how they can continue thriving. So to them, it's not even a thought. Like they're not going to open up a factory to make sure that everybody has a mask and the correct kind of mask, gloves for everybody to be delivered at their house, food to be delivered at their house. It's just beneath them. There's no thought process on that whatsoever. And
Yeah.
I mean, for like, I think that the only way I can like perfectly say that is like by saying that Trump, even to his supporters, suggested that they inject themselves, right, with like sterilizing solution. Like that's his own like followers, you know, that's his own like rallying criers. So to have him say like, hey, just go inject yourself with this, like that's just so twisted.
Yeah. So you're involved with the Chicano 50th Moratorium Committee.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the Chicano Moratorium was?
Yeah, for sure. I also want to give out a shout out to Edward Vidare, who said police terror. Absolutely, it's definitely police terror. I'm not sure if I said that, but we commonly say that in Centro CSO. It's police terror, it's police brutality, it's it's brutalizing, and it is definitely something that we're not okay with. We also call it terror because they are terrorists. They are the actual thugs. They are the actual gangsters that they like to say that we are, but no, they are literally a gang. But yeah, back to your question, Matt. Can you remind me what you asked me again one more time? I'm sorry.
Can you tell us about the Chicano Moratorium?
Oh, yes, that's right. So the 50th Chicano Moratorium, it's a big old committee of people, right? Within it, there are different subcommittees. And if you're listening right now, you can actually check it out online. It's Chicano, the little slash, it's kind of like the hyphen, right? Moratorium.com. And on there, you can see the different subcommittees. There's one for like arts, education, history, finance, labor, security. And then I'm on the social media slash grassroots, which we shortened all that name to Groots. We just call ourselves the Groots. And, what we're trying to do is make sure that the 1970 in particular, because there are other Chicano moratoriums, but the 1971 get commemorated, right? What happened in 1970 is that over 30,000 Chicanos took to the streets to say no more U.S. imperialism in Vietnam, and also no more oppression, national oppression of Chicanos, no more killings. Back then there were still killings. Shout out to everybody who knows their history. They started since the first time that we were on the map, right? We were already here, so that's when they started killing us. So no more killings, no more discrimination. No more, unfair treatment of us, no more brutalizing us in the police stations. It was just like a bunch of demands, right? And so in 1970, they actually, LAPD and East Los Angeles police totally came down and brutalized the people, right? It turned into a straight up like attack. They had that plan the whole time. And they disrupted this peaceful event, this super cultural event of over 30,000 Chicanos that were from all over Aslan, all over the Southwest. And so many people got hurt. They hurt us. We fought back. We tried to defend ourselves. I mean, come on, but they, in all, at the end of the day, they had like so much manpower to, try destroy us. And so many people went to jail. So many people were attacked. They actually killed 3 people. And so, it turned into chaos, but that was planned on their part. It was not planned on our part. We were just going to have our event. So the 50th commemoration is going to happen this year. August 29th is the day, and that would be the 50th one. But because of coronavirus, we have to, we're thinking about changing it up a little bit. What we were going to have try to do was stick to the plan of the 1971. But this time, I think we're going to have to change track. And so we're actually going to be talking about that with the public on May 30th, which is I think the last Saturday of the month. And, anybody's invited. Check out the Facebook event. It's online, or check out the website. We will tell you all how it's going to work out. But if you're interested, please send us a message and you can get involved.
Yeah. Cool. We'll drop the links below, and that'll be good. Thank you so much for your time, Sol. Is there anything you want to?
Thank you.
Is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Is there anything you want to, like, any words of wisdom, any words of
Yeah. So thank you so much again, Matt, first of all, for you to interview me, because this is the first time I actually talked to you. So it's really, really cool. I do want to thank that all the raza that are around and continually surviving throughout this like horrible time, and we're alive. I always think about that, like I'm fucking alive today, like the cops didn't kill me, or like the capitalists didn't get me. So it's always like a good day, right, when we wake up and we're still around. I do have to say that, like, don't be too scared about coronavirus. Like, as long as you're staying as safe as possible, like, and healthy, we should be able to overcome this, right? I have a couple of friends who have come down with coronavirus, and it's super scary. And of course, they went through hell, right? Like weeks of fevers that were really high. One of my friends is actually a teacher in Chicago, and she's currently, I think, like for a month, she's had this, and she's like super, like she's connected to all sorts of things, right? So it is very real. Don't believe Trump. Don't believe the people who think that it's like, nothing to be concerned with. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is try to be as safe as possible. Stay inside your house. And when this is all over, we'll go back to try to do things that we wanted to do before. But in the meantime, just stay safe and in your house.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sol. And I'm sure.
Gracias a ustedes.
Gracias.